Composition can be an overwhelming topic. After all, you couldn't possibly write decent music if you don't fully understand how to properly resolve a German sixth chord. I take issue with that logic because I still struggle to write music after knowing a ton of theory and having played the piano since I was 8 years old. I had keyboard skills that were beyond proficient and a lot of theory background. All those things that people in my comments say that they need to learn before they can even get started trying to compose. And it's not that those tools weren't helpful in some ways, but in other ways it actively felt like they were working against me because I had memorized a lot of information but had no idea how to apply it to a creative process. And I continued to struggle to put ideas together in a coherent way that I was happy with until my composition teacher taught me a few simple concepts that helped put things into perspective and show me how to use the tools that I had. And in an age where we have really too much information at our disposal, it's easy to get caught up trying to learn everything all at once and then never feeling like you truly grasp anything. So in this video, if I were starting out today as a flesh and blood, non-artificial composer, which is something I guess we have to say now, here's how I would approach it and the things that I would focus on first. We live in a world that often celebrates multitasking, but when it comes to most things, it just doesn't work. True progress really happens when you focus on just one thing at a time. And this applies whether you're diving into harmony or theory basics or the general principles of part writing, music production, anything. You will make faster progress if you just stick to that one thing until you have made significant headway in that one thing. Spreading your attention too thin only leads to distraction, overwhelm, and slower progress overall. So, with that in mind, build on a timeless foundation first. The order in which you learn things is incredibly important. If you think of it like building a house, well, it makes sense that you would start with a solid foundation and learn how to do that first before you learn advanced wall building theory, or the advanced names of all of the types of sconces and how they function. Prioritizing fundamental, foundational concepts will make the whole process simpler and easier. So then the issue becomes, what are foundational principles? Seems like theory should be one. That's the one everyone talks about on the internets. Well, to a point, yes, but I don't think in the way that it's taught, it's as helpful as people seem to think that it is. I would prioritize the creative over the analytical, so analyzing what to name each chord, not as helpful as learning the basics of part writing, in which you're actually writing chords and progressions of chords in a linear way. And I've found that these are usually the concepts that have been around the longest and have stood the test of time. The Lindy effect, I think, that says that the longer a thing exists, the longer it will continue to exist. So these timeless concepts are the things that I would spend my time and energy on first. If you learn part writing, that will inform how you sequence a synth sequence more so than the inverse will be true, I've found. If I had learned how to sequence synthesizers first without knowing the basics of part writing, I would make different choices that I think would be less interesting in my synth sequences. And I think when these things sort of cross genre lines is when things get really the most interesting. Another example, I would learn a little bit about orchestration before learning music production, because fundamentally they are both about how to combine sounds in ways that are interesting and effective. Layering, how to keep certain frequencies from interfering with other frequencies so that there's proper space, all of that stuff. Orchestration has been around for longer, and there are more limitations in place as opposed to getting into a DAW where you seemingly have limitless options, because that's actually not what you need at first. But I'll get into that later. If you would like to learn more specifics, see detailed examples of the compositional concepts that I have found to be the most timeless and effective in my own music, you can download my free composition ebook, which I just updated, by the way, to include an exercise that will allow you to put this linear sort of part writing into practice immediately, regardless of your current skill level. That's down in the description below if you'd like to grab it. So I mentioned something there that what you don't need are limitless options in the beginning. In fact, I don't think you ever need limitless options. And this may sound a little counterintuitive, but effectively learning how to use limitations in creative ways is far more powerful than learning all the ins and outs of music theory. You only need enough theory that you can express your musical ideas freely, just the same way as I only need to know enough grammar and vocabulary to be able to express my thoughts in a video like this. And this enough varies for every person. Like, you may be able to intuit more than I can, or vice versa. But understanding some general principles of pattern, contrast, basic phrase structure is far more important, in my opinion, than learning the name of every chord extension and the way that it functions in certain situations, because that is far more prescriptive and analytical. And while theory is an analytical process that can be helpful in some cases, composition is not an analytical process, it's a creative process. Learning more and more analytical tools and processes, if I can say that, will only take you so far. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because it kind of explains the conundrum that I found myself in as an undergraduate in college. I already knew a ton of theory. I had been playing the piano since I was 7 or 8, classically trained all the way through, so learning tons of theory along the way. However, I still struggled to get anything out of my head that felt focused and intentional. I couldn't seem to put my ideas together in a coherent way. Until my composition teacher, Luigi Zaninelli, taught me how to use limitations as a tool. Because up until then, I was trying to figure out how all of that stuff I knew about secondary dominants and German augmented sixth chords was going to help me write what was in my head. And what these limitations allowed me to do is make my own rules that I could then follow and push the boundaries of. And those rules eventually become your artistic voice, and that's what I found for myself. So I would highly encourage you to start to use limitations in some of the ways that I teach in that ebook that I mentioned, to enforce your own set of rules, and that will allow you to explore a limited set of ideas more deeply instead of just skimming across the surface of a lot of incoherent rambling. By the way, preaching to the choir here, that's exactly what my early compositions sounded like. The strength of your initial musical idea, by the way, that's just the term that I use for a motif, a chord progression, a melody, whatever it is, a musical phrase. The strength of that initial idea will strongly impact the resulting composition and the entire process of getting from point A to point B. Stronger ideas are easier to develop. Ideas that are easier to develop are easier to arrange. And suddenly the entire process starts to feel like it almost works itself out, or at least you have several options that are strong and solid, and then you can choose your favorites based on taste without feeling overwhelmed by the limitless number of options that you would have if you were just randomly putting things together. One thing that I found in the cohort that I did last spring, as well as with my one-on-one students, is that we as composers give up on ideas far too quickly. And it's usually just because we aren't sure how to make small adjustments that can lead to more memorable ideas. And then we don't know how to develop them because we haven't made them strong enough to be developed. And it really only takes one solid idea to be the foundation of an entire piece or track. In my latest release, Langsam, I started with a very simple harmonic progression. Then after a little bit of experimenting and just making small adjustments, I discovered that adding a simple rhythmic figure helped the melody stand out. It helped it be more memorable. Now suddenly that became a motif that I could use in various different ways, even when the melody wasn't present. And then, like a good comedian or something, I had a callback that was very clear and identifiable that would make the whole piece feel more coherent. You see how once I found that rhythmic motion of just putting in that little bit of motion, that is a point of emphasis now. I remember that motion. every time I come to it. It's a defining characteristic of the melody now because I've used restraint at the beginning. And then I took that idea of bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum. That little motif is starting to tie this whole thing together. So when I get to the sort of climactic moment, I use that same motif rhythmically, even though the notes are different. I almost dismissed that idea and abandoned the piece entirely. But composition is a process of trial and error. So I just tried making small incremental changes here and there until I found something that I felt made it stronger and not weaker. So the more that you limit yourself in the initial stages, maybe by focusing on just one melodic idea, one chord progression, one simple motif, the more you focus your creativity. And then in that rubbing up against boundaries that you've set for yourself, you discover areas and depths of that idea that you didn't even know were there and wouldn't have considered otherwise. Immerse yourself in the work of the artists that you admire. Listen to the masters of the kind of music that you want to make. This seems obvious, but it's a little convoluted in today's online landscape. Because the internet is so full of experts, I personally would look to learn from people who were doing or had already done the kinds of things that I wanted to be doing. In music, I think there's a fairly simple litmus test for this. What's their music like? You don't necessarily have to like their music, you just have to be able to identify that there's craft involved in them making it, that they know what they're talking about. The proof for that is usually in the work they've done, or not. And once you find someone that you identify with, which may not be me, by the way, and that's fine, I don't try to be for everyone. Once you find that person, don't worry about copying them. In fact, I would say intentionally try to copy them at first. This is not for the purpose of stealing their material and releasing it and publishing it as your own, but it's a learning exercise. And you'll never be able to duplicate them exactly anyway, but in trying and failing to do so in the attempt, you're going to learn a tremendous amount about the kind of music that you want to make. It's a way to gain very valuable insight into their process. My own teacher used to call this simulating an existing work, and he said that it was a common practice for painters. They would go to the Louvre or some famous museum and seemingly be copying a painting, but what they were really doing is trying to simulate the way that that artist did shading or lighting or some other painting technique that I don't know about because I'm not a painter. And that would inform them, and that's something they could then add to their own toolbox. Because over time, they understood that they would add all of these techniques and combine them in their own unique way. Your own unique blend of influences will be filtered through your taste, and that will combine into something new, forming your own artistic voice. My high school piano teacher, Miss Gunn, used to say that one of the frustrating things about music when you're starting out is that there's no ceiling on what there is to learn. So you feel like you're making progress, but never getting to an end goal. But she said, the older you get, the more rewarding that aspect becomes, because you see that there's an endless amount of things to explore, an endless amount of creativity that you can exercise. I think that this beautifully expresses the long game that is music. If your goal is to make a career out of music, think in decades. Don't think in months. Don't even think in years. The journey is endless, and that's the great thing about it. But if you focus on honing your craft first, a lot of the other things that you're worried about will take care of themselves over time. So chase your own curiosity. View music as an infinite game. The goal is to keep playing for as long as possible. And the longer you play, the luckier you will become. But zooming out even beyond that, we're getting a real broad view now. I think the greatest luck of all is just knowing what you're passionate about, because so many people, and I've talked to people like this, they go through life and they never have that thing. They never find out what they're supposed to be doing. You and I have that, and that is an incredible gift in and of itself. You get to make music your entire life. So returning to the first point in this video of focusing on just one thing at a time, what's one thing that you can focus on improving in your own craft, your own work this week?